So I am really delighted to hear that you had a program just last month on monarch ecology because that means I can skip a whole bunch of my usual program and go straight, almost straight, to the great plants that monarchs need, because this is a garden club. I'm a plant fanatic. You want to hear about plants today, right? Here we are. So we are going to begin planting for monarchs. And I want to introduce this concept of a monarch way station. You can see my own personal little metal sign out there at my table, and almost all of that material out there is free to pick up on your way out. You want to stop by and see what you want to get from the table. But the Monarch Way Station concept is out of the University of Kansas's Monarch Watch. You can create a garden that has the things that monarchs need, and then you can register that garden as a Monarch Way Station. And your little registered Monarch Way Station can go on the national map of way stations. Sounds like my microphone is cutting in and out. Worst case, I'll just yell, but I think we're okay for the moment. So this is the first Monarch Way Station at University of Kansas in their own garden just outside the Science Building, I believe. Those signs are very durable. They're nice metal, and you can put them outside and they'll be good looking for many, many seasons if you decide to go that route. So what is a Monarch Way Station, and why do we care here in North Texas? A Monarch Way Station is a place that has everything monarchs need to complete their life cycle successfully. That would be nectar plants for the adults. The adults only have straw-like mouth parts, and so they need to drink nectar from nectar-rich flowers. That would be host plants, which are milkweeds, and they're very close relatives for the caterpillars, because that's all they can eat. They can't be raised on your dill or your fennel like your black swallowtails. They must have members of the milkweed family. And then the final thing that they would need is just some shelter. And that could be very simple. That could be a dense bush, that could be a tree like a live oak, that can be a clump grass that provides just a little place where monarchs can get out of the weather. Doesn't need to be a monarch house. In fact, butterfly houses are probably somewhat useless. So currently there are over 22,000 way stations in the country, and Texas leads the way with the most way stations per state. But one of those M states in the north is catching up to us. So we have to do our part here in Texas and just keep going. 3 things: nectar plants, milkweeds, shelter, and you've got it made. Now, notice I didn't say water. If you have a bird garden, you might be very familiar with the concept of providing water for birds. Monarchs do drink water in Mexico when they're converting fat stores to energy to use during the winter. But they really don't need it so much in the spring and summer and the fall when they're here. They pretty much get all their moisture from nectar. They can drink water occasionally, but it's not something they need badly. So you don't need to have a fountain or a pool or a bubbler to complete your Monarch Way Station. Okay, Monarch Way Stations can be small, they can be distributed, they can be huge. This is one of my favorite. This is actually Master Gardeners at a juvenile detention center, and they put in these beautiful little hexagons, and in each hexagon were different plants. But several of those hexagons together would make a very nice Monarch Way Station. And then the kids that have to stay there get gardening lessons. So that's pretty neat. That's a win-win for everybody as far as I'm concerned. This is my own Monarch Way Station, 37 acres up in Cook County. And it is a wildscape. It is not a garden per se, but it serves very well as a Monarch Way Station. I was lucky enough when we bought this piece of land from my in-laws. It had 7 species of native milkweeds occurring there, which kind of shocked everyone, including the professional botanists. They were saying, "No, you don't have that." I'm like, "Yes, I do." And when they finally came out and saw, they were pretty amazed at the variety of milkweeds that I had up there. But it serves as a very effective Monarch Way Station. Lots and lots of eggs and monarchs every year. You can use other people's space and sometimes other people's money. Just carefully, for a minute, look over this list and think about how many of those types of spaces might be in your area that you could use. And I'm sorry about the microphones. I'm not really a microphone person, so I may mess up from time to time and bonk something. This is another one of my favorites. This is a front yard in Plano. Plano people are as uptight about their front yards as any other urban place. And this man had a little bit of an uphill battle to convert his front yard to a prairie garden. But it's in, it's lovely, the neighbors like it now, and it is, as you can see, serving very effectively as a Monarch way station. He's got lots and lots of life in that little tiny suburban front yard. This one is my front yard. One day I was speaking at a school and I was exhausted. These are seniors in high school. Those people are exhausting. It was an all-day gig, and at the end of the day, the biology teacher said, you know, some days I wonder whether anything I say makes a difference. And I thought, well, great, now I'm depressed. So I drove home thinking about those words the whole way home and thought, does anything I do make a difference in this world? Anything at all? And I pulled up to my curb. I saw this flurry of activity in my own prairie garden in my front yard. And sure enough, there were 13 monarchs that had stopped to rest for the evening in my front yard. They do love this goldenrod, and if you think that goldenrod is a bad allergy plant, think again. This has very large, sticky pollen. It's transported by bees primarily, and it is not blowing around in the wind. You are not inhaling that. It does not give you respiratory allergies. So what's so special about Texas? Dinah touched on this already. The entire population of monarchs east of the Rockies comes right through Texas twice a year. So there's the overwintering site. I'm going to try to use my pointer. There it is. And these green arrows show where they head in the spring. That first generation of monarchs usually gets to, the ones coming out of the overwintering ground, they usually get to about the Austin area before they finish their lifespan. And then the children of those monarchs will hatch out in Austin eventually and fly north to see us. Sometimes they come straight from Mexico and they make it all the way here. And you can tell that that's them because their wings will be ragged and faded, and they will look like they've been on a really long trip. So once they breed here, I think I have some life cycle pictures. A caterpillar, tiny caterpillars, 2 days old, growing and growing, growing so fast that within 12 days, they have increased their body weight 2,000 times their hatch weight they will be. That's pretty big, pretty fast growth rate. Then they're ready to make their chrysalis. They'll hang in a J for about 24 hours until they shed that final skin and become a beautiful chrysalis. This will look and feel almost like jade in your hand. They're very heavy, really dense, and smooth and shiny. When that chrysalis is about 12 days old, it will become transparent, and the monarch is then ready to eclose. We don't call this hatching when they come out from the chrysalis. The real word is eclose, which means to come out from. This young monarch, just beginning its adult life, will be sort of crumpled up when it comes out. That's okay, that's normal. It still has to stretch out those wings and let those harden. They don't so much dry as harden, but it's going to pump body fluids through there, stretch those all out nice, and then those fluids will drain back out and be ejected. Remember, they've been in that chrysalis for 2 weeks, so it's about time for them to release some fluids. And then they are going to, once they are hatched out in our area, they're going to continue that flight north, laying eggs everywhere they find milkweed, and just fly north, fly north, fly north, and lay eggs. Several generations later, probably the 4th to 5th generation of the summer, depending on the weather, monarchs from that northern region will be born slightly different. They'll be born with more flexible wings, larger wings, darker wings, and all of those are adaptations to help them fly better for long distances. And they will head straight from wherever they hatch out, eclose really, to Mexico. So that is why Texas is so important. You can see that they come right through our area twice a year. And when they come through here, those adults need nectar plants, those adults need milkweed in the spring to lay the eggs for the caterpillars. and they're going to need shelter. This was actually taken at Lake Louisville in October. That fall migration, there is a roost at Lake Louisville some years, and I was lucky enough to be just walking at random one morning and walked right into a roost of several thousand monarchs. As they get closer and closer to Mexico, the density increases. This is probably really close to the overwintering grounds. And there they are. You've seen pictures just really recently, so we're skipping right through there. And then they started all over again in the spring. So that's the review, and for those of you who missed last month, a little bit about the monarch life cycle. Let's get to the plants. What do they need from us? That's a really worn traveler. You can see what kind of shape they're in by April if they've come all the way up from Mexico. 7 real steps. Eliminate or reduce your personal pesticide use. Pesticides are not so picky for the most part. They will kill pretty much all the insects that you're not targeting, as well as the ones you are. So be very careful and judicious with your pesticide use. Refrain from mowing milkweeds until the end of May for this area, when most caterpillars will have become adults and are flying on their way north some more. Plant real nectar plants for the spring and for the fall migration. So when I say real nectar plants, it's really possible to get plants that have been so heavily bred that they no longer produce good nectar. They look good, they're sending all the right cues. It's like hanging out a sign that says free pizza and then not having anything when the kids all show up. So you need to avoid things with heavy double petals in the center that physically impede their access to that nectar. And maybe think about planting some more traditional, simpler flowers with simpler centers. Plant native milkweeds. I am sure that there are people here with tropical, just cut out. Oh, here we are. I think maybe I shouldn't stand too close to this microphone. It seems to be a trouble spot. So, there are people here with tropical milkweed in their garden, and I am not here to yell at you today about your tropical milkweed. I will encourage you to pick up the paper out front that says potential risks of growing tropical milkweed for monarchs, but we really encourage you to plant native milkweeds for several reasons. One, I personally feel that the tropical milkweed is going to become invasive in Texas very soon. It's already getting loose into wild areas, being found where nobody planted it. And we have enough invasive plants in Texas. We don't need to add to that list with another troublemaker that can't be controlled. Secondly, we know that monarchs can use the tropical milkweed just fine, but how about that whole other suite of insects that are adapted to use our Texas native milkweeds? We simply don't know how they fare on the tropical, whether they can get what they need or not. Milkweeds vary a lot in their toxicity, in those chemicals that are within the plant tissues. And if we're planting milkweeds that aren't native here, we may be starving a whole batch of tiny creatures that we know very little about. And then plant real nectar plants again for the fall migration, and tell others that monarchs need milkweeds. One of the things I brought with me today, oh, and wouldn't you know it, it's not here. It's a little orangish card that's out there on the information table. And it is a Monarch Watch contact card. On the back, it's going to tell you there's a milkweed market, and you can go online and you can order plugs of milkweed grown from Texas seeds that I collected for this region. So they are local, they are native. If you're doing 2 acres or more, they're free. You just have to pay for shipping. If you're working with a school, they are free for schools. And if you are just wanting to order some and share a flat with your friends, then you can order at a reduced rate because the whole program, the whole growing program, is somewhat subsidized by grants. So it's a great way to get native milkweeds. I know a lot of you probably said, oh, I'd buy them if I could find them, but they are still difficult to get in the store, so Monarch Watch is trying to fill that gap. And then finally, create and register your way station so your neighbors can see what you're doing. Let's talk about the milkweeds. So these are 2 local native milkweeds, and just have a look at those plants. These are growing in the wild in a former cow pasture, pretty much abused land that's being restored, and you can see how happy those 2 plants are. There's really not a big trick to growing these milkweeds. This is the green milkweed. And the caterpillar has decided to eat the flowers on this one. Usually they go for the leaves, but occasionally you'll find them eating the flowers and or the pods. My first milkweed is going to be the green milkweed. This is from that ranch again, the Leo Ranch up in Wise County, or Monte. The flowers are fairly green themselves, not just the leaves, but then there are these little splashes of purple in those blossoms, so they're quite pretty. And if you're seated far back, I don't know if you can see, the monarch is feeding happily with the honeybee right there. They are both feeding together and happy to do so. It's a very rich nectar plant in addition to being a caterpillar host plant. You'll find so many different butterflies using this. There are 7 gray hair streaks in this picture. One of them is edgewise, so it's hard to see. And these were just the ones that didn't move when I approached with my camera. There were more than this. So this milkweed is like Grand Central Station. You could literally pull up a lawn chair and watch the activity on this plant. There are so many butterflies and good native bees and honeybees that will use this. When it's ready to go to seed, it will make these pods. And as those pods ripen, they will begin to release some fluff. And you can see that fluff with the seeds attached out at my table in a jar. And it will fly away, each little one on its fluffy parachute. We used to call those fairies when I was a kid and chase them down the street, never realizing that as we got close enough to make that grab, we were making just enough breeze to blow it further. It's very hard to catch one. The seeds themselves are the little brown parts on the end of that fluff. They look like this when you pile them up. I do have milkweed seeds for sale, by the way. My Native Plant Society from the Collin County chapter has milkweed seeds in these little bags, 2 species, the one that we just covered and the one we're about to cover, with growing instructions inside. At this point, it's a little late to get cold stratification done this winter. So I think I would probably do a quick start method, a day or 2 in the freezer, pull those out, cover them with hot water and let them soak overnight before you plant them outside. But you can look up milkweed quick start methods online and that will show up. That method is not on the instruction sheet. Anyway, these are $5 for the 2 kinds of seeds that are in here. And the larger bags have 4 kinds of seeds, 2 nectar plants and the 2 milkweeds, and those are 10. And that all goes to my Native Plant Society chapter. I'll be out there after the meeting. I wanted to show you, if you're from the north, how many people moved here from a northern state? Lots of you. I did too. It's okay. We got here as fast as we could. But we are familiar with common milkweed, which spreads and just makes a thicket of milkweed. The milkweeds that I'm going to recommend to you today do not do that. They have a taproot, very much like a potato. Some of those are 18 inches long. That makes them a rough, tough prairie survivor. They store carbohydrates and moisture in that root so they can come back after a tough season. But they're going to stay put. A milkweed plant like this will stay put in the same spot for 100 years. You don't need to worry about it colonizing your whole yard. And there's the green milkweed growing at my place, blooming about the same time as the paintbrush blooms. The second one is antelope horns milkweed. This one grows flatter in a big circle. And I have seen them in the wild with as many as 23 flower heads growing out of almost bare, nasty chalk. I mean, it really doesn't want your love. So if you have a problem spot in your garden that's kind of rocky and dry, this is a great plant for that. The green milkweed is a little more flexible about its moisture. It will tolerate flooding better than this one will. But it's a pretty plant. Look at the flowers close up. That's actually not the best shot. They're quite maroon in the center. All you Aggies out there, a touch of maroon in your garden. And there is that nice organized flower head. The green flower heads are sort of blousy and loose, while the antelope horns always makes this compact, very integrated, rounded head. The third one is butterfly weed. This one, oddly enough, does not have the milky sap that the others do and that the milkweeds are really known for. It's not butterflies' first choice, but in a lot of ways it's gardeners' first choice because it does have those very bright orange flowers. A lot of my photos are taken in the wild, not in a garden setting, so excuse the mess around there. These are from my farm. The buds are quite beautiful. One of my very favorite milkweed pictures ever. I want to do Easter eggs like these buds here sometime. I think that would be nice. And just a couple more of those milkweeds. They are good in sandy soil. Do you have the black clay or the red sandy soil here? I'm thinking of the red sand. Both. Okay. Well, these are happier with good drainage. So try to find them a spot where you've got the red sandy soil or give them some extra good drainage. This last one, well, it's not the last one, sorry. The Yerba de Zizotes. You might hear it just called Zizotes, and that's not exactly correct, but it is a neat milkweed that does do well in North Texas, and it is native here, but it's not abundant here. We're going to find it a little bit further west, a little bit further south, and so it is tough. It will take those dry conditions. We just found our first specimens in Collin County a few years back. It was not known from Collin County until about 5 years ago. But it is there now, and I do know that it grows in Fort Worth, and you should be good with this one as well. It's kind of a neat look. This one is one that was not available and is becoming available in the nursery trade, and I would advise you all to get one as soon as you can because this is just a great little plant, the Texas milkweed. It's endemic to the Texas Hill Country. That means it's found nowhere else in the world except Texas and that one little part of Texas. But the cool thing about this is it will tolerate shade. It is okay in the shade. It has beautiful glossy green leaves and these snowball white flowers. Really, really pretty plant. And it just went gangbusters in people's gardens in North Texas last year. We finally got hold of some. Several of my friends planted them, and everybody liked the way it performed. So I would recommend this one highly.
How much did everybody plant shade?
Mine is in part shade. My friend's is in sun, except she has a taller plant next to it. And she said she thinks that taller plant shades it just a little bit. But they will grow under junipers in the shade in the hill country. So, I mean, that is a hard spot for something to grow. Swamp milkweed, on the other end, it sounds like you would really need a wet space to grow this, but you don't. An average irrigated garden in North Texas makes this plant perfectly happy. It's normally pink, and it's beautiful. But there's also a white cultivar available now. It's kind of got red stems and white flowers, and it's called Ice Ballet. And the Monarchs like this one just as well. So sometimes when you change a plant through selection and hybridization, things happen, but this one seems to be fine for the Monarchs. There's another couple Ice Ballet shots. This one, I doubt if you're going to be able to find, but if you have it, if you have some acreage in you, it shows up. Keep it. It's very nice. The wand milkweed. The problem with this one is it doesn't really bloom early enough. Well, it doesn't send out leaves early enough for the Monarchs. They don't care if it's flowering or not. But it will be really a neat plant that you can showcase if you manage to find one for your garden. And the fall Monarchs might use it. They're not normally going to breed in the fall, but we're finding that in late August, there is a group of Monarchs that comes through and does one last round of breeding here in Texas before they go to Mexico. So it's sort of the pre-migration migration group that does that. There's some more on the wand milkweed, another local native. World milkweed is becoming available, and this is the exception to me saying that they don't colonize. This one will. This one will spread by runners, and it's just very light and airy and open. So you could mix this in a dense bed and just let it roam around among your other flowers. But it looks so much like grass, you're going to be tempted to pull it out. The good thing is that Monarchs really love that foliage, even though it's wispy. And so they can use it, they will use it, they enjoy it, and you can just let that roam around in your larger flowers. There it is. And it can be either quite dense or fairly open, and you won't know till you plant it. It makes pods, but not nearly as big as the green milkweed pods. And then finally, a couple of relatives of the milkweeds. And then we'll get to other flowers, I promise. So the two-flowered milkvine is one that's related to the milkweeds. It's such a close cousin that the monarchs can use it. It's a little fuzzy and it grows down at ground level. It would be kind of cool to use as a ground cover, I think. So if you can ever find it, give it a try. We know they can use it. Here's one that I recommend only with caveats. You will find it in the wild. It is native here, but it spreads like crazy. So if you're trying to feed a lot of monarchs and you have space, you could plant some blue vine, honey vine, Sinantium leva. But if you don't, you might want to reconsider putting it into your garden because it will cover a fence and then it will cover everything else. And lastly, another one you may find in the wild, if you're walking around, is this ankle pod milkvine. And all the pods have these neat little flaps, these ridges on the side. So you won't mistake this one for anything else. You can see those little flaps on the left. It's not very showy in terms of flowers, and the vine is not really dense either. So this is not a great garden plant, but if you have it in the wild, you want to just keep that. And the tropical. Okay, there is paper out front that will tell you some of the problems with growing tropical milkweed. Again, I mentioned that I believe personally that it's going to become invasive within the next 5 to 10 years. I know that they've already found it in 3 counties down near the coast where it is starting to grow in wild places where nobody planted it. So I think it's coming in our direction. And then it can concentrate certain parasites of monarchs in the coastal areas and in San Antonio where it doesn't get cold enough for this to go dormant in the winter. Here, we're almost always going to get a hard freeze. It will go dormant, and that parasite issue is not much of a problem. Now, the monarch researchers are split on this plant, and there is one camp that says, absolutely nothing wrong with it, go ahead and plant it, and the monarchs are driven by things other than milkweed availability on their migration. And then there's another set of monarch researchers that says, we believe there's something about this plant that is such a powerful lure to monarchs that they will break out of sexual diapause and go ahead and breed when they encounter this plant. So if you want to be perfectly sure that you're not doing anything to harm monarchs, you simply cut this all the way back down to a couple inches above the ground, removing all the leaves before the fall migration. And that way your conscience is clear, you're not tempting anybody to stay and breed, you're not going to harbor those parasites, and you can go ahead and grow your tropical. It's going to be very hard to do because it'll probably be blooming at that time. And you can tell it from the other orange milkweed from the stems. The tropical is smooth as a baby's bottom, has very, very little fuzz, and the native one with the orange blossoms has hairy stems, hairy leaves, top and bottom, even the buds are hairy. So, most important thing, wherever you purchase your plants, please keep bothering the employees at that store, asking and asking and asking again, are these clean? Are they insecticide free? Even some very reputable nurseries have purchased plants from buyers who assured them that the plants were clean. And when I took those milkweeds home and fed test caterpillars, those caterpillars died within 6 hours. And it was because the grower who supplied them even believed they were clean. But that very last guy down, the one that actually has the sprayer wand in that greenhouse is the one that needs to get the message. These plants do not get treated. So it can be hard to get clean plants. But what is the point in buying host plants if everything you feed them to dies? So may all your weeds be milkweeds? I sort of think they got a bad PR rap at some point. Who named those guys that? They should be named milk marvels. Let's go on to other nectar plants. So your goal is going to be to have something blooming pretty much right through the warm months, starting in March and going all the way through until November, because you could have monarchs at any time during that time. Now the summer monarchs are going to be very, very few and far between. A few of them don't manage to get north in time, and after about June 6th, June 7th, they're stuck here, and they're going to have to spend the summer here. And they may breed a little bit, but not very much. So I'm not as concerned about your summer monarchs. They're not really contributing that much to the overall monarch population. We're primarily concerned with spring and fall. But you want to have coverage. So you can have some things that bloom in the spring, some things that bloom in the fall. It's very rare, of course, that you're going to have something that blooms the entire time. And provide an assortment. Milkweeds themselves are good nectar plants, but a large fraction of your plants should be from the daisy family. And this is simply for energy and foraging efficiency with insects, because you have all those teeny little center flowers in your composite daisy family plants. The insects can land, and they simply have to move their mouth parts or maybe their feet. They don't have to get up and fly away to go nectar on another whole blossom. So they're really energy efficient for insects to use. Other plants that they really like have flowers that are clustered into a tight flower head, and it works the same way. They really just don't have to move very far to get to their next sip. When you use plants from other parts of the country, remember that it's not the cold hardiness that's going to get you here. It's the heat tolerance. So as gardeners, you already probably know that. You're more concerned about whether it's going to survive the 105 than whether it's a little frost tolerant. Buttonbush is the first one, and these are in alphabetical order. So if you're starting to worry, the Latin alphabetical order, so you can check the Latin name on these, and when I get close to the end, you'll know it. Buttonbush is my first plant, and I absolutely adore this plant. So do monarchs and native bees and so many butterflies. I had one in my yard before it got too shady in the back, and one day I simply went out there with my camera, and in 15 minutes I counted 17 species of butterflies on this plant. So if you have a space for a buttonbush, it is awesome. If you have seen buttonbush in the wild, you may be thinking, this plant likes to grow at the edge of the lake where it floods all the time. I can't put that in my garden. It turns out that they don't actually need that. They tolerate it, which is why they're found there and nothing else is. But they don't actually need that regular flooding to be happy. So they will do fine in ordinary garden soil and conditions, and they will reward you with a fabulous show. There's one of our lovely native bumblebees using that same buttonbush. Purple coneflower, this one's actually native to Texas, but do you know where in Texas it's native? The one that you get at the big box store is actually native to pretty much the single county next to Arkansas. So that is pretty far north and pretty far east of us. And that means as you go further and further east in Texas, the annual rainfall is going to increase. So these are thirsty plants compared to our native coneflower. You can find these anywhere and they're great garden additions, but if you could get the local one, then you never have to water it. Once it's established, these are out there growing themselves on hot, dry, rocky prairies and doing just fine. So the narrow-leaf coneflower, wildly attractive to lots and lots of butterflies. Here's some at my farm. And here it is, just loaded down with butterflies, but on a windy day. So they're all facing the same direction there into the wind. Sawtooth daisy, Engelmann's daisy. I think there are probably another couple names, cutleaf daisy. Has anybody seen this or had it in their garden? It's got a really long bloom season, really nice cheerful blooms, and it's pretty orderly. It's kind of vertical and it just stays in its place with these gorgeous leaves there for most of the year. So it's a really nice garden plant. I think standard gardeners ought to use it a lot more. Eringo, this one you may not have ever seen or used, but you've probably seen sea holly and in your catalogs and so forth, maybe a little bit paler purple version of this. This is a local native, but it was largely extirpated when people had cattle in this region because it is prickly and it could poke the cows in the eye. So the ranchers did their best to get rid of this plant when it was a cattle area. And they did a really good job. There's not a whole lot of it left. You have to go out to a fairly nice wild prairie space to find this anymore. It is an annual, so if you try it one year and you don't like it, you don't have to have it back. Just cut off those seed heads before they start distributing that seed. And if you do have it, you're going to find everything under the sun uses it. Not just the monarchs, the great purple hair streaks, the bumblebees, other native bees. And it's just a wild plant to have all this architecturally interesting shape, this hot blue anthers on a hot purple flower, and then all of this wildlife will show up to use these plants. Greg's blue mist flower. How many of you already have this plant? Oh, you know, this one is a winner when it comes to attracting butterflies. It's so, so popular. And it's very popular with butterflies. This is sort of my awful strip between the fence and the alley where nothing happens, but my Greg's blue mist flower was there, and in 2005 it attracted an awful lot of monarchs. Monarchs are genetically programmed to seek out plants in this family. And that's really interesting that they do, because their close relatives, the queens, actually have little scent glands on their wings, and they produce a chemical from chemicals found in this plant that is needed to attract a mate. The monarchs aren't using those patches anymore. There's like an appendix that's just kind of left over and not used, a relic, but they are still attracted to the plant. They haven't forgotten yet that they love the plant. This is Michael McDowell's front yard again. So anything that's called mist flower also works the same way. This is the late bone set. It can get a little crazy in your garden, but if you're willing to keep after the sprouts, I would highly recommend this for fall bloom, September and October. Shrubby bone set, again a late bloomer, but an awesome plant, very well behaved. It is shrubby, and so it pretty much stays in one place and will attract everything under the sun. This is a photo by Bill Ward from the Native Plant Society, and you can see 3 species of butterflies there. Prairie verbena. Who has verbenas of any kind in their yard? Okay, are they good butterfly plants? You see butterflies on those? This is our local species here. This is the one that lives wild without any help on the North Texas prairies, and it's extremely tough. It is so tough that I have taken a little sprig out from under the compacted soil of a swing set at a park in July and transplanted it and forgotten to water it, and it was fine. So, you know, you almost can't kill this one. If you do kill it, you probably loved it to death. It probably just got too much attention, or the soil was too good. Beautiful blooms, and I think I showed you that slide of the really worn out monarch. That monarch was using this plant in very early April. This plant will bloom from March through frost, and so it's got a really long bloom season. Oh, there she is again. Sunflowers. Almost any kind of sunflower will do. Any that you have space for, as long as they're not like the teddy bear style with those big double centers, because that impedes access to the nectar. But any open sunflower, whether it's Maximilian sunflower, annual sunflower, sawtooth sunflower, have y'all heard of that plant? It can grow 18 feet tall, and it likes a wet area, but it is a magnificent plant when it is blooming. There's mine next to my house, and it started in approaching the second-story bathroom window. That's when I knew I couldn't really just recommend that one wholeheartedly everywhere. But it was a neat plant, and I still have plenty to give away. It spreads if you really do want some. We do have a lot of lantanas in our landscapes in Texas. Some of those are not native, some of them are. Our Texas lantana has the orange and red flowers like these, but you're going to find pink ones and all yellow ones and all these different colors. A lot of those are either hybrids with lantana camera, which is from the islands and parts further south, or they are a straight lantana camera. And in other parts of the state, they are having big problems with lantana camera. It is getting loose, and it is taking over state parks, and they cannot get rid of it. So we would like to encourage you, if you can, to go for our lovely Texas native. It's just as pretty. It just comes in slightly different color. One of my very favorite fall plants is the Leotris that blooms here. These are all wild photos, so these plants have not been cared for in any way in a garden setting, but they're lovely in your gardens. They will do well in your gardens, and they will do well if you don't care much for your garden. They have a corm underneath that allows them to store a lot of moisture, nutrients, and then below that corm, they have an 8-foot root system. So if you're on watering restrictions and you'd still like something to bloom in the fall, this is going to be able to drink from far below that soil surface, store moisture in that corm, and still produce a bloom in about September, October. There's mine in the wild on my farm. Look at that. I mean, that's a wild plant. Imagine what it's going to do in your garden. Turk's cap. Who's got Turk's cap? Probably a lot. Okay, a lot of you have Turk's cap. And those of you who don't, somebody who does will share it with you, because this one will spread, right? You'll have to keep after it to keep it where you want it. But it's a great butterfly plant. It's a great bee plant. And those really neat little cherry colored blooms are going to be out in the hottest months when everything else is kind of sad and taking a break. Pitcher sage is one of our fall bloomers. It's a little taller, maybe a little bit unruly, definitely not for the front of the bed. It doesn't go berserk, but it gets tall and could fall over. So put this sort of toward the back where other plants can help hold it up, and you'll be rewarded with lots of butterflies and lots of beautiful native bees on this. Mealy blue sage, I bet a lot of you have that one, right? Yes, okay. And have you all heard the story about the Henry Dulberg cultivar? You've heard that one? I see some nods, some not. Henry and Augusta Dulberg are two named cultivars of this beautiful native plant. And they're very good. They do produce a lot of nectar, so they're still fine for our wildlife. But those two cultivars were found on opposite sides of Henry and Augusta Dulberg's tombstone in a cemetery, and that is why they have those names. There's a Henry. Augusta is white. Goldenrod. Now, here's another plant that I have to recommend with caveats. Some goldenrods will spread quite freely. Others are pretty well controlled. Some can get 7 feet tall, and some are no more than a foot or two. So be careful, do your homework, and study before you buy a goldenrod and put it in the wrong place, so you'll be happy with your plants. This one is in my front yard, and it is the very tall one. Some years it's 6 feet tall, some years it's 4 feet tall, and I can't tell you what the difference is, except I think it was very dry the year that we had the 4 foot tall blooms on it. This one, though, is at my farm, and the whole plant is only this tall. It's going to stay under 2 feet and grow sort of in a vase shape and have these flat-topped goldenrod clusters instead of the big plumes that the taller plants have. So it's a very different species, but still really attractive to all kinds of butterflies. And you can see a couple of the other sorts of butterflies. That's sort of the shape of the plant on the left. Not really a great photo since there's so much grass around it. And that's what's growing in my field when the monarchs come through in the fall. Fall asters. And you notice I just put Symphotrichum species. It used to be aster species. They've changed the name of all our Texas natives to Symphotrichums. I don't know why. They have nothing better to do except lengthen our names, right, and make it harder. But I didn't make it more specific because they are so confusing to identify that most of the time your nursery pots are simply going to say fall aster. And most of the time those asters will be purple. If they're white, that's okay. Those are also great plants and very attractive to monarchs. Here's one blooming out at, oh, I forget what the place, it's a nature center not too far from here, I think. Pardon me? Bob Jones, that's exactly right, the Bob Jones Nature Center. Thank you. Lots of different butterflies will enjoy your fall asters, especially if you have the purples. But even after it doesn't look like there's anything left for them to use, aster species continue to produce nectar. So if you can get away with it somewhere in your landscape, you can leave those stems up there If you were to carefully look at that photo, there are 7 butterflies, 2 beetles, a moth, and a fly on that stem. And it doesn't look like there's anything left for them, but there they are. So that was happening in November after pretty much everything else had given up. Mexican sunflower. This one is not a native, but I put it in because it's so pretty and so useful for monarchs. It produces a lot of good, okay. I walked into a black hole. I'll stand over here where things seem to work well, sorry. But this is a big plant. You're gonna need a lot of space for your Mexican sunflower. It might be worth it. It just attracts an awful lot of things, but you can see this was towering up over my head at Dale Clark's Butterfly Ranch down in South Dallas. So you need to plan a big space for these. Texas vervain, I'm hoping that you'll be able to find this in garden centers soon. It's not really commercially available yet, although people are starting to grow it for retail. And it is a really nice long season butterfly plant. Like that prairie verbena, it's going to start in March and it's going to go right through frost. So it's not showy, but it is great. That's about as good as it ever looks right there. That's a nice dense one. The charm of these is that they don't take up much space in your garden. You can tuck them in between other things, and then it'll just be loaded with all this butterfly activity, the coming and going of butterflies between your flowers. Cowpen daisy, and you notice we're in the V's. We're not very far from the end of the alphabet, so you're all staying awake so far. That's good. We're almost there. This is another one that's an annual, and it reseeds freely. So you have to decide whether you can stand that or not. If you cut off the seed heads, you're going to keep the birds from eating the seeds. They like those. But if you leave the seed heads, you may have lots and lots of little babies. And you need to let some seed heads mature so that you can reseed it for the following year anyway. But they do love it. This one is taken much further south. I don't think we have that particular butterfly here. And it is a very rich nectar plant, super attractive to butterflies. A relative of that one is the frostweed. It looks completely different, but they are in the same genus. And so the frostweed is going to be one of your very best fall bloomers that will bloom in shade, even dense shade. It can go in the sun, but it's happiest in part shade to full shade. So this one is great up between 2 houses where there's hardly any space and hardly any light. It will produce a nice foliage and then a great bloom in the fall. There it is close up. And here it is just covered with butterflies. Again, this was taken a little bit further south by my friend Kathy, but that is usually what the scene looks like. That one is not a queen. That one I think is a Gulf frit instead, but or not a queen or a monarch. Frostweed also has a parlor trick. When the weather has been slightly warm and the sap's been flowing, and then you get a sharp cold snap overnight, the stems will break open, the sap will begin to ooze out, and it will make these wonderful frost berries, these curlicues of frost that only last until the sun comes up and melts them. And it's really hard to do this justice with pictures. But you'll wake up one morning, you'll look out and you think, who toilet papered my yard? And then you realize, oh, it's the frost fairies. They've been here again. And close up, this is just marvelously delicate sheets of frost that curve around. There's a little bit of a close up. And this has to be close to the end. We're in the W's, right? So Zexpinia. Anybody have Zexpinia? A lot of you do. Great. So this is a super native bee plant, and it's also a pretty good butterfly plant. However, it will reseed vigorously. So anybody that wants some, talk to your neighbor. They've got some for you. This is one of my favorite little native bees, the leaf cutter bee, and you're going to find them frequent visitors to this plant. Zinnias. We do have a native zinnia in Texas. It's native to far west Texas. Super hard to find in the nurseries. If you do find it, be aware that it wants far west Texas conditions. It wants it dry. And so don't overwater this or you'll lose it. However, the regular old zinnia that you get it's all from Zinnia elegans seed that was collected in Mexico a long, long time by Mr. Zinn. And so he brought these seeds up from Mexico, and this is why one big non-native garden cheat in my native garden, because I feel like it is native along the monarch's migratory route, and that they would have grown up with this plant and know it. So I feel like this is a great addition to a monarch garden, particularly if you're doing a school garden, a garden in a library, something like that that's very public, and you've got to have public buy-in in a hurry. Plant zinnias. They're colorful, they're eye-catching, everybody loves them, and you will have immediate curb appeal. So you don't have to wait a couple of years for your native perennials to really start looking great. When you select zinnias, you want to go for some old-fashioned kinds that have those nice open centers again, so the monarchs can get to that nectar without having to fight all those little petals aside. And I think that's it. Oh, that is a guy trying to do camouflage by sticking salvia buds all over his back, but he's doing it wrong. He's on the wrong plant. He's wandered away. And just a bed of zinnias. So that is all I have for you today. And I hope that whatever's popping up in your garden that you didn't plant turns out to be a magnificent surprise. Volunteer. I will be out in the lobby with my literature and seeds. One of the things that you might want to pick up while you're out there is my personal plant list. These are all plants that I have verified seeing monarchs on in North Texas. So you're welcome to take that literature with you. Thank you.